When you picture George Washington, what comes to mind? The marble statues? The majestic crossing of the Delaware? The stoic, flawless father of his country who could not tell a lie? The man whose jawline was so sharp it could cut British taxes in half? Forget that guy. I want to talk about the George Washington they don't teach you about in AP US history. I want to talk about a 22-year-old, hyper-ambitious, painfully inexperienced Virginia fuck-up. A guy who was so out of his depth, so blinded by his own ego, and so monumentally bad at his job that he accidentally sparked the first truly global war in human history. Welcome to Audacious History. I'm your host, and today we are diving into the ultimate failing upwards story. We're going back to 1754 to watch a giant ginger nepo-baby named George completely shit the bed in the Ohio Valley. He built the worst fort in human history, signed a confession he couldn't even read, and started a conflict that would literally change the map of the world. And the craziest part? His PR was so undeniably good that we eventually made him the first president of the United States. Grab your powdered wigs and a stiff drink. This is going to be a goddamn clusterfuck. To understand the magnitude of Washington's fuck-up, we have to set the stage. The year is 1753. North America is a geopolitical powder keg. On the East Coast, you have the British colonies rapidly expanding and horny for more land. Up north in Canada and down in Louisiana, you have the French Empire, who have basically drawn a giant ring around the British and are saying, "Don't you dare step out of your little sandbox." And right in the middle, you have the Ohio Valley. The Ohio Valley was the 18th century equivalent of beachfront property on Mars. Everybody claimed they owned it. Nobody actually had the paperwork. And the people who actually lived there, the Iroquois, the Shawnee, and the Delaware nations, were looking at both European empires like, "Are you out of your fucking minds? This is our house." Entered George Washington. Now, Washington in his early 20s was not a military genius. He was a surveyor. He walked around the woods measuring property lines for rich guys. But George had three things going for him. He was tall as shit, about 6'2" in an era when most men were 5'6". He was incredibly ambitious. And he had a famous older half-brother named Lawrence who had essentially bought George his social standing before dying of tuberculosis. George wanted a commission in the regular British Royal Army more than anything in the world. He didn't just want to be a colonial militiaman. He wanted the real deal red coat. He wanted the prestige. So when the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie, needed a messenger to go tell the French to politely get the hell out of the Ohio Valley, young George literally volunteered himself. Dinwiddie, looking at this 21-year-old kid with zero combat experience and zero diplomatic training, said, "Sure, what's the worst that could happen?" Spoiler alert, Robert. The worst that could happen is a 7-year global bloodbath that kills over 1 million people. But hey, hindsight is 20/20, right? Washington goes out in 1753, delivers a letter telling the French to leave, and the French, very politely over wine, tell him to go fuck himself. Washington reports back to Virginia. Dinwiddie, rather than sending a seasoned diplomat or a grizzled veteran to follow up, decides to promote our boy George to lieutenant colonel of the Virginia Regiment. He gives him a ragtag militia of about 160 guys who are mostly indentured servants, drunks, and guys who couldn't find real jobs, and says, "Go back out there, build a road, protect our claims, and don't start a war unless they start it first. George, puffing out his chest, gathers his miserable little army and marches back into the dense, horrifyingly thick forest of the frontier. He is 22 years old. He has never commanded troops in combat. He speaks zero French. And he is about to run headfirst into a political mastermind who is playing chess while George is eating the checkers. While Washington is stumbling through the woods trying to figure out how tents work, there is a man in the Ohio Valley who actually knows what the hell is going on. His name is Tanacharison. The British call him the Half-King. Tanacharison is an Iroquois leader, a seasoned diplomat, and a brilliant strategist, and he hates the fucking French. He knows that his people are caught between two massive European empires. He decides that the best way to secure his people's future is to align with the British and use them to kick the French out of the valley. But there's a problem. The British are moving too slowly. They're cowardly. They're hesitant. Tanacharison needs to force their hand. He needs the British and the French to start killing each other so his people can maintain control of the region in the ensuing chaos. When Tanacharison meets young George Washington, it is a masterclass in manipulation. Tanacharison takes one look at this giant, awkward, virgin energy colonial officer and realizes he has found the perfect, gullible pawn. Tanacharison starts feeding George intelligence. And by intelligence, I mean pure, unadulterated paranoia. He tells George, "The French are coming for you. They have massive armies. They are going to slaughter your men. You have to strike first, George. You have to be a man." Washington, who is already terrified, stressed out of supplies, and utterly lost in the Appalachian wilderness, buys it hook, line, and sinker. His journal entries from this time read less like a confident military commander and more like a paranoid camp counselor who thinks the Blair Witch is outside his tent. Every snapped twig is a French sniper. Every gust of wind is a French battalion. By late May 1754, Washington is camped in an area known as the Great Meadows. It's miserable. It's raining. Everyone has dysentery or is complaining about the rations. Suddenly, Tanacharison sends a runner to George's camp with a message. "I have found the French. They are hiding in a rocky glen just a few miles from here. They are plotting to ambush you. Come right now, bring your men, and let's kill these bastards." Washington doesn't pause. He doesn't ask for a second source. He doesn't verify the intel. He grabs 40 of his men, leaves the rest at camp, and marches off into the pitch-black pouring rain to meet up with Tanacharison. What Washington doesn't know, and what Tanacharison definitely does know, but conveniently forgets to mention, is that the Frenchmen hiding in that glen aren't an attack force. They are a diplomatic envoy. They are basically carrying the exact "please leave" letter that George himself had delivered the year before. They are led by a guy named Ensign Joseph Colin Duvalier de Jumonville. And Jumonville is about to have a really, really bad day. It is the morning of May 28th, 1754. The sun is barely coming up. The rain has finally stopped, leaving the woods damp and choked with thick fog. Down in the glen, the French diplomatic party is just waking up. Some are in their underwear. They are making breakfast. Their guns are stacked by the trees. They have absolutely no idea that standing on the 50-foot rock cliffs above them, looking down like extremely stressed out gargoyles, are George Washington, 40 nervous Virginians, and Tanacherison with a dozen of his warriors. Washington has surrounded the Glen. He looks down. He sees the French. To his paranoid, exhausted mind, this isn't a camp. This is a trap waiting to be sprung. He has to take the initiative. He has to be the hero. The historical record gets a little muddy here because everyone involved later lied their asses off to save their own skins. But here is the general consensus of what happened next in this spectacular shit show. A French soldier looks up. He sees a giant red-headed Virginian standing on a rock. He screams. He dives for his gun. Washington panics. He yells, "Fire!" All hell breaks loose. The Virginians fire down into the bowl. It's a slaughter. The French are trapped, running around in their undergarments, getting picked off by musket fire. They manage to fire a few shots back, killing one of Washington's men, but it's completely one-sided. It lasts maybe 15 minutes. Finally, the French commander, Ensign Jumonville, realizes this is a massacre. He screams for his men to stop fighting. He waves his arms. He is shouting in French, holding up diplomatic papers, screaming, "Stop! Stop! We are diplomats! We are on a diplomatic mission!" The guns fall silent. The smoke clears. The Glen smells like sulfur, wet earth, and fresh blood. Washington steps forward. He looks at Jumonville. Jumonville is shouting frantically in French, shoving the diplomatic papers toward Washington. Now, remember when I said Washington didn't speak French? Yeah, that's a problem right now. Washington has a translator with him, a guy named Jacob Van Braam. Van Braam steps forward to translate the diplomatic papers. Van Braam's French is, to put it lightly, hot garbage. He's struggling to read the bloody parchment, trying to explain to a still adrenalized Washington that these guys aren't an invasion force. They are an embassy. Washington's stomach drops. The realization starts to hit him. Oh, fuck. Oh, sweet Jesus. I just ambushed an official diplomatic party in peacetime. I am so fired. While Washington and his terrible translator are trying to figure out how to unfuck this situation, Tanacherison decides he's heard enough. He realizes Washington is going to accept their surrender and let them live. That doesn't work for the Half-King's master plan. So, Tanacherison steps forward. He walks right past Washington. He walks right up to the wounded French commander, Ensign Jumonville. Tanacherison looks down at Jumonville. In fluent French, Tanacherison says, "Thou art not yet dead, my father." And then Tanacherison raises his tomahawk. He buries the tomahawk directly into Jumonville's skull. But wait, it gets worse. Tanacherison rips the tomahawk out. He reaches down into the man's shattered skull, pulls out a handful of the French diplomat's brains, and washes his hands in them. George Washington, aged 22, who just wanted to play army and wear a cool red coat, is standing there watching a diplomatic envoy get brutally assassinated right in front of him by his own ally. Washington doesn't arrest the Half-King. He doesn't do anything. He just stands there, absolutely paralyzed, realizing that he has just committed an international war crime. 10 Frenchmen are dead. One is a high-ranking noble diplomat. The rest are taken prisoner except for one guy. One French soldier managed to escape barefoot into the woods during the chaos. And that one guy is currently sprinting all the way back to the main French fort to tell them exactly what George Washington just did. George Washington has just lit the fuse on the 7 Years' War. Hey, if you're enjoying watching the undisputed father of our country completely shit his britches on an international scale, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel. Now back to the story. So you've just overseen the assassination of a French diplomat. You know the French army is going to come down on you like the wrath of God. What is your next move? If you're a competent military commander, you retreat. You fall back to a fortified position, you wait for reinforcements. You write a very long apology letter to your boss. If you are George Washington, you decide to stand your ground. You retreat to a place called the Great Meadows and you decide to build a fort. Okay, picture the worst possible place to build a defensive structure. Washington looks at a valley that is essentially a geographic cereal bowl. It is a depression in the earth surrounded by high tree lines on 3 sides. It's a marsh. The ground is spongy and wet. Washington points to the absolute lowest, wettest point of this topographic toilet bowl and says, "Build it here. The high ground is for cowards." He didn't actually say that, but he might as well have. He forces his exhausted, starving, terrified men to build a circular wooden stockade. It's tiny. It's 53 feet in diameter. It looks like a shitty dog pen. And he names it, with absolute zero sense of irony, Fort Necessity. Because it was a necessity that they build it, and it was a necessity that it sucked. Tanacherson, the half-king, shows up, looks at this fort, looks at the high ground surrounding it, looks at Washington, and basically says, "You are a fucking idiot. I'm out of here." Tanacherson and his warriors abandon Washington completely. They realize this is a suicide mission. So now, George is left with about 400 militiamen and regular British troops who have straggled in. They dig trenches outside the stockade. And then, because God clearly has a dark sense of humor, it starts to rain. And it doesn't just rain, it pours. It is a torrential, biblical, unending monsoon. The trenches Washington's men dug immediately fill with water. And since the men have nowhere else to go, they are standing in waist-deep water. Worse, because they are trapped, those trenches quickly become the latrines. So Washington's men are literally standing waist-deep in their own shit and mud. And then, on July 3rd, 1754, the French arrive. 600 French soldiers and 100 Native American allies surround the bowl. And who is leading the French army? Captain Louis Colon de Villiers. Does that name sound a little familiar? It should. He is the older brother of Ensign Jumonville, the guy who got his brains scooped out 5 weeks ago. Captain de Villiers is not here for diplomacy. He is here for blood. The French don't even have to charge the fort. They literally just hide behind the trees on the higher ground, looking down into the bowl, and start taking target practice. It's like shooting incredibly miserable, wet, dysentery-ridden fish in a barrel. The battle is a massacre. Washington's men are dropping like flies. To make matters worse, because of the torrential rain, the British gunpowder gets completely soaked. Washington's men can't even fire their muskets. Their guns are useless. The men break into the fort's rum supply and just start getting blackout drunk. Because if you're going to die in a muddy shit trench, you might as well be completely hammered. By nightfall, a third of Washington's men are dead or wounded. The fort is a slaughterhouse. George Washington is standing in the rain, covered in mud, watching his first real command crumble into an apocalyptic disaster. Finally, the French call out a ceasefire. Captain de Villiers, perhaps not wanting to fight in the dark and the rain, offers Washington a chance to surrender. Washington, realizing he has absolutely no other option, agrees. And this is where the fuck-up goes from a military disaster to an international geopolitical catastrophe. It is around midnight. It is pouring rain. Inside a tiny dark tent, the French hand over the Articles of Capitulation, the official surrender document. There's just one tiny detail. The document is written entirely in French. Once again, Washington doesn't speak a word of French. And once again, he relies on his incredibly incompetent translator, Jacob Van Braam. Van Braam is squinting at this soaking wet piece of paper by the light of a flickering, sputtering candle. The ink is running. He is translating it out loud to Washington. The document lays out the terms. The British get to leave the fort alive, they get to keep their colors, but they have to leave the Ohio Valley. Washington is thinking, okay, this isn't so bad. We get to live. We just have to go home. Great! But there is a specific phrase repeated multiple times in this document. The phrase in French is l'assassinat du Sieur de Jumonville. L'assassinat. It's practically a cognate. It means assassination, murder, an illegal, cold-blooded killing. But Van Braam, who is either legally blind, incredibly stupid, or just wants to get the hell out of the rain, translates the word as the death of or the loss of. He reads the sentence to Washington as, in regard to the death of the Lord of Jumonville. Washington, hearing the death of, thinks, yeah, well, it's war. People die. It was an accident, a misunderstanding. But yeah, he died. George Washington takes a quill pen, and on July 4th, 1754, exactly 22 years before he would sign the Declaration of Independence, he signs his name to the document. He didn't just surrender a fort. By signing that document, George Washington officially, legally, in writing, confessed on behalf of the British Crown to the cold-blooded assassination of a French diplomat. He basically handed the French government the ultimate casus belli, a justification for war, tied up in a neat little bow with his signature at the bottom. When the French government gets hold of this document, they don't just file it away. They publish it. They print it in newspapers all across Europe. They scream from the rooftops, "Look at the barbaric British! They ambush our peaceful diplomats in the woods, and their own commander signed a confession admitting to the murder." Britain is deeply embarrassed. They try to claim Washington was tricked, but the damage is done. The diplomatic ties between Britain and France completely disintegrate. This singular, bungled skirmish in the muddy woods of Pennsylvania kicks off the French and Indian War, which immediately spirals into the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was World War Zero. It involved every major European power. It was fought on 5 continents. It resulted in the deaths of over 1 million people. And it was all started because a 22-year-old surveyor got paranoid, couldn't control his Native American ally, built a fort in a puddle, and didn't know how to read French. But here is the absolute wildest part of this story. Here is the reason Washington is the undisputed king of failing upwards. When Washington limped back to Virginia, completely defeated, his reputation didn't tank. In fact, the exact opposite happened. Governor Dinwiddie and the Virginia elites needed a hero. They couldn't admit that their hand-picked golden boy was an incompetent boob who just caused an international crisis. So they spun the story. They framed George not as a failure, but as a brave, tragic hero who stood his ground against overwhelming odds. They published accounts of his gallantry under fire at Fort Necessity. The fact that he was tricked by the French translator only made him look noble and honorable compared to the deceitful, sneaky French. Washington leaned into this incredibly hard. He started writing letters to his brothers and political allies, casually dropping lines about how much he loved the sound of bullets whistling past his head. He cultivated the image of the stoic, unbreakable Virginian who had survived the crucible of the frontier. He took the most monumental fuck-up of the 18th century and used it to build his brand. And ironically, the war he started is exactly what eventually led him to the presidency. The 7 Years' War bankrupted the British Empire. To pay off the massive war debt, the British started heavily taxing the American colonies. The Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Townshend Acts. Those taxes pissed off the colonists so much that they rebelled, started the American Revolution, and who did they pick to lead their new army? The tall, famous war hero who had experience fighting on the frontier, good old George. The history we are taught in school loves to smooth down the rough edges. It loves to turn flawed, sweating, panicking humans into perfect marble statues. We love the myth of Washington, the untouchable god of liberty. But honestly, the real story is so much better. The real story gives hope to every 20-something who thinks they've ruined their life by messing up a spreadsheet or replying all to a company email. The next time you make a massive mistake at work, the next time you feel like an absolute fraud who is entirely out of your depth, just take a deep breath, look in the mirror, and remind yourself, at least you didn't accidentally assassinate a diplomat, build a fort in a toilet bowl, and start a global war. And if George Washington can bounce back from that to become the face of the $1 bill, you're going to be just fine. Thanks for watching Audacious History. And to any of my French people out there, I'm extremely sorry for the butchering of your language. If you learned something today, or just feel infinitely better about your own life choices, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below on who you want me to cover next. Until next time, keep your forts out of the mud, and for the love of God, hire a good translator. See ya!